South Carolina women's basketball coach Dawn Staley has reportedly had conversations with athletic director Ray Tanner about a new potential contract. Could that mean a lifetime contract? We'll talk about the possibility of that and much more on today's Locked On Gamecocks.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Happy Friday, Gamecock Nation. I hope that you've all had a good week to this point. We've got a ton we're going to dive into on this edition of Locked On Gamecocks. We're going to talk about South Carolina's first NCAA regional game that's going to take place later today against the James Madison Dukes. What do they need to do to win the game? We'll dive into that later on, and we'll also talk about Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks football team playing at some times this next season that fans are not going to like. Why did that happen, and why could it actually be potentially a good thing for the Gamecocks? We'll talk about all that as well. But to start off today's show, I want to talk about a recent report that came out from the state's Peyton Titus, with Jordan Kay also contributing to the report. The report is this: Athletic Director Ray Tanner has had some, quote, conversations since the season ended, end quote, regarding a potential new contract, whether it's an extension or a raise, for Dawn Staley. He also mentioned, quote, and about her future too, end quote. What that all tells me is this: Dawn Staley is now planning for her post-coaching life. Now, I want to make it abundantly clear. I am not sitting here and telling all of you that I think Dawn Staley is going to retire sometime in the next couple years, even 4 years or 5 years. I think that Dawn Staley still has a lot of gas left in the tank as far as her coaching career at South Carolina is concerned. However, I do also think that there are a couple things that we need to remember when we think about this conversation regarding how much longer Dawn Staley is going to do this at South Carolina. The first thing is this: Dawn Staley has made it clear in the past that she does not plan to coach into her 70s or pull a Gino Auriemma, so to speak. Gino, of course, obviously being in his early 70s, still leading the program up at UConn. Dawn is not going to do the same exact thing. Dawn, I think, understands that at a certain point, later down the road, she is going to eventually want to move on from coaching the game of basketball. And she admitted this past season when College Game Day was in town for South Carolina's game against the Georgia Bulldogs at the CLA that she considered retirement in the previous summer because of mainly apparently how the team looked during that stretch. But the fact that Dawn Staley was even willing to admit this on national television for everybody to hear, that tells me that she might be a lot closer to getting ready to call it a career than some fans might think. Here's another thing that we need to keep in mind here. Back in 2023, Dawn Staley did some Aflac commercials with legendary men's basketball coach, former Duke coach Mike Krzyzewski. Now, why is it that I bring Coach K up in this conversation, these Aflac commercials? Well, here's why I bring it up. You have to imagine that having to film those commercials, those two spent at least a decent amount of time together before actually shooting them. And it is fair to wonder, in my opinion at least, if Dawn maybe inquired about Coach K's post-coaching life, what retirement has been like for him. And look, Coach Krzyzewski, he has an office still on Duke's campus. He still is pretty close to the basketball program, and he essentially has kind of served as an ambassador for Duke University as a whole. Also, Dawn Staley has another legendary Hall of Fame coach that she can reach out to and talk about, retirement with, and that is Steve Spurrier. And I understand some Gamecock fans are never going to forgive him for leaving midseason back in 2015, then within a year and a half or so going back to his alma mater in the University of Florida. But look, I do think that Steve Spurrier is somebody that Dawn would be willing to talk to, because Spurrier was here for Dawn's first 8 years as the school's head football coach. And again, he serves in a very similar role to Coach Krzyzewski at Duke, serving as an ambassador or a representative of Florida. So, with all of that now being out there, I now want to talk about a lifetime contract, because when Ray Tanner talks about Dawn Staley's future, what that tells me is this. Dawn, I don't think, wants to leave South Carolina entirely. She has talked plenty of times about how much she loves the school. She loves the city of Columbia. She genuinely loves this place. And the state of South Carolina has been home for her family for decades upon decades. So that is where I feel like a lifetime contract could come into play here for Dawn Staley if a new deal were to take place. And to discuss the lifetime contract and what it could look like, I want to go back to when John Calipari got a lifetime contract at Kentucky. Now, when Calipari got that contract back in 2019, the contract was a 10-year deal essentially, but at the time, John Calipari was 60 years old, so that would have taken him all the way up till he was 70. If Dawn Staley, hypothetically speaking, were to get a lifetime contract of that same ilk right this moment, she would be 64 years old when that contract expires. And that is around the time frame where I feel like that Dawn Staley would pretty much hang up her whistle for the last time as a head basketball coach. Now, I went and looked at a Forbes article to get more information on Calipari's lifetime contract. And this is some of the information that I got from that article. The first being this. Beginning in the 6th contract year of the deal, which would have been this upcoming season if Calipari had remained at Kentucky, he would have had the option to step down at any point and transition into a role where he would have served as a special assistant to the athletic director of the school or as a university representative. His annual compensation still would have been pretty decent too. He would have gotten paid $950,000 a year annually in either of those roles, I would assume. I would imagine Dawn Staley would not mind having that kind of stipulation in her contract. If she finished up a season and she just decided, you know what, I just don't have the energy to do this anymore. But again, she still wanted to remain involved with South Carolina and the ongoings of the school, then she could go into a university representative role. I don't think she would ever accept a role as a special assistant to the athletic director. At least I would assume she wouldn't want that kind of role. Maybe it wouldn't give her as much freedom as she might like, but still, I think that's something she would consider. And also, that lifetime contract that John Calipari got from Kentucky included media and endorsement payments. I'm unsure right now if Dawn Staley is getting media and endorsement payments that maybe are originally procured from the school, and then part of what they get is given to Dawn. I'm not sure if that's the case. Like, for example, I think Steve Spurrier, he used to get some Under Armour money, because obviously the Gamecocks transitioned to that brand while Spurrier was the coach here. If that's not the case right now, I have to imagine again, that would be something where if I was Dawn Staley's agent and she wanted a contract like this, I would probably throw that in there. So my point that I'm getting at with all of this is that I think that if Ray Tanner came to Dawn's agent and Dawn herself, brought him in a room and said, listen, we've decided to give you a lifetime contract. And it had a lot of those same stipulations that John Calipari had in his lifetime contract at Kentucky that he was given 5 years ago. I think Dawn would sign up for that in a heartbeat. And obviously, Ray has gotten pretty good at, saying something without really saying anything at all. In essence, yeah, we've talked, but not giving away any specific details. But the fact that he did mention to Peyton Titus and Jordan Kay of the state newspaper who put out this story that they talked about her future along with a potential contract extension, that tells me that something like this might be in the works. And quite frankly, I think it would be a great move by the school to give Dawn Staley a quote-unquote lifetime contract. So again, whole off season to go to see if that happens. But if it does, then obviously it would probably signal the final contract of Dawn Staley's coaching career, but also means, again, there's still a lot of time left before Gamecock fans have to worry about Dawn Staley walking out the door as the head coach for the final time. Now, the football team found out the kickoff times for a couple of their opening games at Williams-Brice Stadium in the 2024 season on Thursday, and the reaction was, it was expected because it wasn't all that great, and the times, quite frankly, aren't that great, and there's one simple reason why. I'll talk about that in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier than before. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You can also save with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets for the NBA Finals with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Friday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, or your first watch on YouTube. Let's talk about some kickoff times for South Carolina's football team. They found out the kickoff times for their first 3 games of the season on Thursday afternoon. Now, we of course already knew about the Kentucky game that's going to take place in week 2. That game is kicking off at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. But now we know when South Carolina will take on Old Dominion and LSU as far as their kickoff time is concerned. The Old Dominion game is taking place at 4:15 p.m. Eastern time on the SEC Network in Week 1. And then in Week 3 against LSU, that kickoff time will be at 12 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. And as expected, a lot of fans were not happy with these kickoff times because South Carolina fans, obviously, they want these games to be night games in order for the opponent to have to feel the full effect that Williams-Brice Stadium can bring down upon you. But it's pretty easy to say that the reason why South Carolina was handed these kickoff times was because they went 5-7 in 2023, and they got a ton of night games last season and for the most part did not perform. So when that happens, you have a down year like that, these TV people, they don't care how cool your environment looks in a night game. They are going to make you essentially have to earn those slots back. So with Week 1 against Old Dominion, honestly, I don't think it's a terrible thing that's kicking off at 4:15 Eastern time. I'll explain why in a couple more minutes. As far as Week 3 against LSU is concerned, I will say Shane Beamer and his staff, they should take some umbrage with that kickoff time. And not because of the fact that they're kicking off at 12, but more so because of the fact that what this tells me, and I'm sure a lot of you who are listening or watching the show today, is that the TV people don't think you're going to beat Kentucky. Because think about this. LSU's playing Southern Cal in Week 1. Southern Cal, they don't stand a chance against LSU, in my opinion. The Tigers are going to win that game. LSU will likely be undefeated coming into this game. South Carolina, as long as they don't slip up against Old Dominion, and if they defeat Kentucky in Week 2, they will also be undefeated at 2-0. So that kind of game in Williams-Brice Stadium, it should be a night game. But again, the TV people don't trust you right now. You went 5-7 last year. Apparently, they don't think you're going to win this road game at Kentucky. And to be fair, Shane Beamer's only won 2 SEC road games in his 3 seasons up to this point at South Carolina. Now, to give you some context, here are some other games that are going to be starting between 7 o'clock and 7:45 in Week 3. New Mexico at Auburn. Don't know how that got a night game slot, but whatever. Texas San Antonio at Texas. Again, don't understand it, but okay. Georgia at Kentucky. That should really infuriate Gamecock fans because, again, that just hammers home the fact that, hey, they think Kentucky is probably going to beat South Carolina. Could you argue the reason that game's got the 7:45 or 7:30 slot on ABC is because of Georgia and Georgia alone? Probably. You could probably make an argument for that, but part of me does feel like that, if Kentucky, they felt like was going to be 1-1, that game wouldn't get a late night kickoff. Toledo's playing at Mississippi State. Apparently that deserves 7:30, 7:45 kickoff. Kent State at Tennessee. A lot of those games, it makes no sense why they're taking place at night. Mississippi State getting a night game over South Carolina hosting LSU. Again, makes no sense. So I'm not saying you have to agree with the decision, my overall point here. But I am saying you probably shouldn't be surprised either. So this leads me into a bold take that I'm going to have here for y'all. And this might have some of you really question at this point my knowledge about South Carolina football. But here's what I'm going to say. Night games at Williams-Brice Stadium early in the season. I'm not talking about October, November. I'm talking about early on in September. They're just not the same, in my opinion. And the best start time, in my opinion, for home games at South Carolina in September are actually at 4:15. Here's why I say this. When a game is starting at noon, like the LSU game in week 3, that's not a great time. First of all, fans have very little time to get ready for the game. It's literally, especially if you got a family and you don't have all the time in the world to just go hang out with your buddies and your friends at a tailgate. You're getting up, getting dressed, maybe you're bringing your own food. You go there, you get your parking spot, or maybe you pick up food. You go to the Bojangles that's literally right down the road from Williams-Brice Stadium. Get some food, sit in your car, eat, and then you basically go into the stadium. That's really all the time that you have before the game's about to start. And then, obviously, those that still do try to have a little bit of fun, responsibly, of course, before the game, they might put themselves more at risk. And obviously, kickoffs at noon, what's the thing that sucks the worst about it is it's getting hotter as the game progresses. So, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, especially if maybe you make a rookie mistake and you wear dark clothes to the game, yeah, you're going to feel the brunt of that South Carolina September heat. So 12 o'clock games are not great for all those reasons. 7 o'clock. The reason why I say night games are not great for South Carolina in September is because, sure, at the beginning, the environment is awesome. The fans have had all day to get ready for the game. Student section is going berserk, but it tails off after a certain point. Families that maybe, especially are in the upper deck, just try to get some tickets so that they could take their kids to the game. They're leaving early to go home, maybe for church in the morning, or obviously maybe the kids, they're just a bit tired and they're ready to go home and go to sleep. Maybe reasons why that you can all understand for the most part. And then students, listen, let's just go ahead and be honest. And I can be honest because I was in their shoes just a few years ago. Some students, during the off season, they kind of forget proper protocol for themselves as far as having fun before the game is concerned. And then when the game starts, they start to feel the effects of that. That is a real thing that does happen. So sometimes those fans, students, they get about a quarter, 2 quarters in. They go, yeah, this ain't fun. I am ready to get out of here. And they leave early. Other students, they might be getting readjusted to the new class schedule that they have for that fall. And they might have stuff they want to take care of on Sunday. Obviously, the way it usually went for students, me and my friend group when I was at USC, Saturday was a fun day. If you have anything you got to do, get it out of the way in the morning so that way you can spend your afternoon and the evening with the boys. Sunday, you got to crank back down, get ready for the school week ahead. Some people, they maybe get that started on Saturday night. So, point being, for everything I just said, I think that is why 4:15 is actually the best time, because it's going to get cooler, for one, as the game goes on, and secondly, fans are more likely to stay. Families that are coming to the game, and also the students that come to the game as well. So, Old Dominion kickoff time, I actually don't think is terrible, But the LSU kickoff time, yeah, that one stinks. The only possible silver lining for South Carolina kicking off at 12 against LSU is the fact that for LSU, they're used to kicking off at, say, 11 Central Time. Their clock might be a little bit messed up as far as their routine is concerned. But outside of that, yeah, it stinks for South Carolina. But the only way to correct that and fix that is, hey, go out there and win some football games. Don't go 5-7 again. If you do that, you'll get those night game slots back. And that'll change very quickly. So we'll see if maybe they get some more night games when they release more kickoff times on June 11th on the SEC network. But yeah, first 3 weeks, not really great for South Carolina outside the Kentucky game and Old Dominion game, I'll say, as far as that is concerned. Now, the baseball team is going to be taking the field later this afternoon against the James Madison Dukes and look to get into the winner's bracket of the Raleigh Regional. What are they going to have to do in order to accomplish that? We'll talk about that in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in 30 minutes or less. All right, South Carolina's baseball team is going to begin regional play later today against James Madison. It's the 2 seed versus the 3 seed in the Raleigh Regional that is being hosted by the NC State Wolfpack. If South Carolina wins that game, then I believe they play on Saturday night against the winner of the NC State and Bryant game. If they lose against James Madison, then they got to play in the early day slot on Saturday against, obviously, the loser of NC State versus not James Madison, Bryant. So, with all that now being said, let's talk about what has South Carolina's got to do to win this game against the Dukes. Well, in my opinion, there's 2 things primarily that they need to accomplish. And no, neither one of them involves fielding. The first one is Eli Jones. Eli Jones gonna start this game. It'll be interesting to see what the strategy is from Mark Kingston and this coaching staff. Is it a situation where, hey, we want Eli to go out there and give us 5-6 innings if he can? Or is it, hey, we're going to let him go out there and pitch 3, maybe 3 1/3, 3 2/3 if he's feeling really good, and then take him out, maybe hold him to a certain pitch count, and just try to keep giving them different looks. Don't know what the plan is going to be for that, but no matter what, Eli Jones has got to maintain control of the zone. And yes, he is going to have to trust his fielders to make plays behind him. Now, Eli, obviously, look, he is not an overpowering pitcher. He's got some good stuff, but he primarily is looking to pitch to contact, and that starts with his sinker fastball. That is going to be the pitch that he's going to need to utilize in today's game because, look, James Madison, you look at their batting lineup, they got a couple of really solid batters. Guys like Fenwick Trimble, Brendan O'Donnell, and Jason Shiavon. But the stat to know about James Madison's batting lineup is this. Only 2 batters, Trimble and Kyle Langley, have struck out less than they've drawn walks. The team's strikeout to walk ratio is 1.63. I couldn't tell you if that is great or terrible, but again, the fact they've only got 2 batters that have drawn more walks than have struck out at the plate, I would say overall that's not good. So there's a chance that Eli Jones, if he mixes his pitches well enough and locates them, he can keep this lineup off balance and therefore get them right where he wants them and be able to pitch to contact and force these guys into a lot of grounders. And again, trust the infield behind you to make some plays. By the way, 5 of the Duke's everyday starters are right-handed batters. So again, that's why I mentioned that sinker earlier. He needs to trust that and essentially let his pitches do the work for him. Now, the second thing that South Carolina is going to need to do in this game in order to win it is they need to get to James Madison's starter, Todd Mazzocchi, early because Todd has not gone past 4 innings of work but once all season long. Now, that could signal that he is used in more of an opener role. Again, he's only going to pitch 2-3 innings. We'll let him go longer if he can, but his ERA is above a 6. So I think that for South Carolina, you look at this James Madison team and you look at the schedule they played. This is the tricky part about studying these teams getting into postseason play. Because James Madison, look, you can't look at their entire resume because they play in a lesser conference than you. So the stats can be a bit deceiving. So the way in which I look at the stats for this game is I look at, okay, how did they perform against Power 5 competition? This pitching staff gave up on average 7.25 runs per 9 innings pitched against Power 5 competition in the regular season. And that doesn't include the fact that when they faced Coastal Carolina, who was not Power 5 technically, but is about the closest thing to it in the group of 5, they gave up 27 runs to the Chanticleers over 30 innings of play when they played Coastal Carolina. So this is a pitching staff that you can get to, but for South Carolina, the key is basically this. Make sure your starting pitcher is comfortable and in control and rattle their starter early. Get out ahead of James Madison, put the pressure on them to have to come back. If South Carolina can do that, then I think that they can win this game and move on to the winner's bracket. If they don't, then this game could get very, very interesting later this afternoon in Raleigh. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show, as always. What are your thoughts on this recent report from the state newspaper about Dawn Staley getting a potential new contract? Do you think she deserves a lifetime contract where she can transition to a different role at a later date? Also, what are your thoughts on the kickoff times for South Carolina's first 3 games of the 2024 football season? And lastly, what do you think the baseball team needs to do to knock off James Madison later today in regional play? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @A_line_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Friday and a fantastic weekend. And I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.